Welcome everyone to the next Ancerious discussion. Today we're going to be looking at how to make characters cool and memorable in RP without sort of turning them into a meme. We're going to be looking at how to actually create a character, important aspects to focus on when creating a memorable character, how to make them respected in an RP, and how to build up a respect and make them more memorable across multiple RPs or arcs. How to develop and plan a future for your character, pitfalls and tropes to avoid which can detract from your character, notable characters within the group itself, notable characters and IPs which are memorable, and how to deal with character death, closing a story, and closure. So first off, how do you create a character? Well, this one is kind of pretty simple, really. So first off is have a solid concept of the kind of person who you want to make. That can just be a base idea, or it can be something that is required for a story. So you need an NPC or a particular story element for an RP, and you need to fill it by creating a character. Or you have a cool idea for a character and you want to create them. Either one works. But at the end of the day, you want to have a core concept which you build everything around. With this core, you then need to consider every other aspect that you build onto this character needs to complement and add to them and reinforce that core concept in that way. So, for example, if you create a leader, for example, of your nation, you need aspects of them to be bolted on around that core that complements the fact that they're a leader. Are they a meek leader? Are they a strong leader? How do they rule? What's their personality like? How does that affect your nation? How does your nation's situation affect them? Etc., etc. Always try to put in anything that you're wanting to add or turn the character into as a complement to your core concept, or the aspect that you're needing to fill in an RP. Also, another really basic thing is have some idea of where you want that character to go and how they act as a person. Pretty much, I see what happens quite a lot is, especially in some of the other servers I've been to, is people create these big characters, especially entities or superpowered characters, and they don't really have any direction for them. They don't have a sort of a goal that they're going to be working towards. And so they just kind of aimlessly mill around or don't do anything. And it's the same with just normal characters in general. You don't want to create a really interesting character that you want to make memorable and just kind of have them randomly show up in places with no clear direction for both of their personal story and also the story that they're going to be interacting with in general. You want to have them, in a linear, with obviously, curve-offs to help improve them, direction that's, character going from A to B. Not just going into random RPs and doing random stuff, etc. And obviously, you need to have an understanding of how they're going to act and, present themselves in the RP and any story that you choose to present themselves in. You need to have an idea of okay, this person is, rather talkative, or they might be anxious, or any of the above, and you need to have to represent that and use that and how they act to reinforce that core concept. You don't want to have a leader who is supposed to be this really strong emperor character as this kind of timid and sort of timid dude who doesn't really know what's going on, and so that kind of doesn't reflect him properly in RP. And the final aspect in how to create a character is actually get them into the story, get them into an RP. Even if you have them in a very basic layout, you can, as a method, actually create them on the fly. Now, I don't recommend this unless you're quite well into knowing how to run RP and develop characters. But you can introduce a character in an RP or a story who has virtually like a really, really small core concept and just run with it and just sort of drop things on the fly. I do this quite a lot because I run tabletops on Sunday, and Swingfire does this a lot as well because he runs tabletops on Saturday, and we kind of have to do that on the regular where we have to introduce the party to new characters, but they're not really that fleshed out, but the character gets fleshed out through the tabletop and the roleplay. I also do it a lot with my NPCs in RP. So if I need, a particular story basis to be filled with a character, I'll create an NPC. I'll give them a sort of like a little bit of a backstory, but they're a disposable character. However, as things go on, depending on what happens, they might become much more prominent, and they might be the centre of attention for a particular side arc for a party of characters or someone else in particular, and thus I basically just flesh it out on the go. But as I said, don't try and do that all the time because it gets a bit messy. So, important aspects to focus on when creating a memorable character. Number 1, characters with weaknesses are much more memorable than characters without weaknesses. If your character has more weaknesses than strengths, they're going to be more memorable because anything they achieve is much more, shall we say, impressive than, if they're just some normal dude. Do they have some sort of affliction? Do they have some sort of personal problem? Do they come from a disadvantaged background? Do they have powers that cause them actual problems more than they actually help the person? It all depends on what you want to go for, but having characters with weaknesses is a major part of creating like something that really sticks with people. Ironically, the weaknesses don't always have to be intrinsic to that character. They can also be circumstantial, but we'll get to this in a minute. Having a fleshed out backstory and tying them into other plot and lore is also really important. You can't, in my opinion, have a memorable character unless they have a very well thought out beginning of where they come from, how they came to be, a good middle, and a good end. Now, in order to give them a good beginning, you need to build up their backstory. Now, that doesn't require you to fucking write out like, oh, they attended this high school at this particular age and, they found a small box under their bed which gave them godlike powers. But you can go like, okay, they were born here, their parents did this influenced them in this, this particular way. You can then use a lot of the different, background lore in the group that we have here to sort of spice up their backstory. Obviously, if they come from like another universe or whatever, then okay, if you make whatever sort of like references you need, but you can reference here like unaligned nations or a particular main arc, like so-and-so's character was a soldier and they fought during the First Ancerious War, and because they got screwed up by the Immortal Empire, they have like a bionic leg or whatnot, and it doesn't work properly. You can tie these things in, and it doesn't have to like intrinsically be like, oh, well, they single-handedly defeated the APP during the Second Ancerious War. It doesn't have to be major, but even small story elements which tie into other well-known story elements can really help flesh the character out and make them seem like they belong in that universe. And that's key, because you want that as a basis for later. Another really good thing to sort of like focus on for creating a memorable character is their mannerisms and their general feel in an RP setting. Now, this is different from how they act, because how they act is how they approach situations. Their mannerisms is how they actually portray this in a written form. So, like, your character might have a nervous tick. or your character might do something compulsively, or just like little things that you can drop in to make your characters more believable. Some people are more animated with their hands. Like right now, I'm talking to you, and my hands are all over the place. I can't help that. That's how I talk. I always have to be animated with my hands. Characters can have this. Now, you don't need to write this like every single post, but consistently writing these little mannerisms can help them feel much more realistic in a setting and how they are as a person. And having them as a general feel is sort of like, how do you want them to be in an RP? How do you want them to affect a particular RP story? So I want my character to join a particular RP thread, and because they're a timid, reclusive person but pretty intelligent, they're going to provide this RP with an aspect of a really intelligent person who can try and work things out behind the scenes and support a party of individuals sort of behind the line. You know, they're not going to be like fighting and whatnot, but they're going to be doing stuff behind the scenes. And you can link that in with some backstory stuff. This is sort of like how you want to have them as like what they can contribute to a particular RP. And because of that, if you're consistent with that, you can make it quite memorable. So you know, if your character's been in multiple RPs where they've helped several teams of individuals in a really like, you know, oh, well, I actually know this and it's relevant to this lore and it ties into this, people are going to be like, oh, cool. And then they might gain a little bit of a reputation for themselves and being a quite notable individual for their knowledge or whatnot. And it's these little things that sort of like slowly build up over time. And as Drax says in Con's text, backstory does not need to be public either. It can be revealed over time, but it's there to influence the character and make their decisions and personality valid and sensible. Again, backstory is a foundation. You cannot build a house without foundations, and you cannot build a character without a fair backstory, because you need, you know, every character in every story is a series of threads, and they have a beginning and they have an end. But if you haven't got backstory, your threads are all over the place, and the beginning is just completely frayed into some convoluted mess. If you build a backstory, you can tie in different plot elements that give you starting stories with that character, like unresolved PTSD from a war, or they have unresolved business with a particular character, or they are out to try and find a particular individual, or they're out to do this, that, and the other. Things that you can may not be immediately relevant to the first RP that they're going to be in, or even any others, but it may help influence their decisions and come to the fore later on in a bigger plot. Really key there. Which kind of comes on to my next point, actually, which is having a thought-out progression for them. Don't necessarily have, like, every single thing planned out for them, but have an idea of where you want them to go. You know, if it is just some normal average Joe on a space station that you've created, alright, don't necessarily have to figure out, like, oh, what are they going to be doing 5 RP threads down the line? Like, obviously, if it's a circumstantial NPC, you don't need to worry about that. But if you are creating an emperor-like character, or a prominent politician, or a prominent admiral, or a key character that you intend to either tell a personal story with, or the story of your nation through their eyes, you want some kind of progression. For example, a lot of my Union characters, like my admirals, were kind of cookie cutter at the very start. I'm not going to lie, they weren't written particularly well. However, as my nation has gone through 2 galactic wars and numerous crises, they are beginning to disagree with one another on how to approach these things. And this is then diversifying them and is leading each into their own individual progression arcs, which is some will become much more radicalised, some might even turn against their comrades, and, you know, it gets more and more complicated. But I have at least, you know, I don't know exactly how this is all going to turn out, but I have a planned progression for them in a loose sense. There's nothing wrong with planning out an entire story arc for your character. Just always give it leeway depending on what happens in an RP. Obviously, you don't want to plan some like really strict event where your character meets a particular character in an RP that you're running, and all of a sudden somebody decides to derail it and kill the character, like, then it gets a bit tense. But always be able to sort of like give and flow with the plot, essentially, but always have an idea of where they're going and how that's going to influence RPs. So the next sort of like, I guess the key thing is how to make them respected in an RP. So this is in like, I guess a singular RP. This is how to make like a good character that everyone, you could just bring into an RP and people can be like, cool. This person's solid. Number one is have them act, and this is with heavy inverted commas, normal. Now, what I mean by this is have them respond as normal people would. Obviously, players tend towards the more extreme sides of storytelling, I find, and that means that, like, say you're all playing a bunch of sort of like regular normal people. This is a purely, example. On a space station. Suddenly the space station gets invaded by dimensional horrors, so Barry the mechanic picks up his wrench and tries to beat these interdimensional creatures that are beyond his imagination and look terrifying beyond all belief into submission with his fucking massive wrench. Well, okay, but shouldn't Barry be busy pissing himself and tearing his own eyes out? Bit extreme, I know, but my whole point is have them respond how people would respond to events. If they see something horrific, don't be afraid to write your character going like, oh fuck, and like actually having a moment of fear. Maybe they throw up or something if they're not used to that, or like, if they're losing, they might get like extremely frustrated and angry, or, just give them human responses to situations. And don't sort of like brush it off either, because sometimes GMs will give you scenes where like something major happens, like an NPC who's been helping the party for a while just gets brutally murdered by the bad guys in front of your eyes, and all of a sudden all the people are just like, okay, I start shooting. Anyway, I start blasting. Like, it really detracts from the scene. But if you have all of the characters in the party go like, holy shit, that guy just got murdered, that's pretty fucking terrifying, and like, hesitate before opening fire and like contemplate their life choices, sure, that's more realistic. Like, even if you decide, fuck this, instead of fighting that big dimensional horror, I'm going to run for it, that's cool. Just have them so that they act normal. Obviously, this applies differently to entities and, like, powerful individuals, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't just go, anyway, I start blasting. Like, have them so that these things still affect them, and have them so that they still respond in a normal fashion to events. Just because they're super ultra powerful doesn't mean that, like, watching a mortal get torn apart in front of them might, it might still affect them. But anyway, just have them respond as things go in RP. Don't just ignore events as they happen. This kind of also ties into don't have them able to overcome adversity whenever. A good character is one that faces adversity and obstacles at every turn and has to legitimately overcome them. This kind of ties into like some of the things we're going to get onto later, but like I guess a really big key example of how not to do this would be Rey from the sequel trilogies. Like, every single obstacle and piece of adversity that character faced got waved away in like 30 seconds or less. And it killed the character, utterly. So if a GM in an RP gives you an enemy that is, touted as being a fucking threat, especially to like a character like yours, terrifying and a serious issue, respond to that. Don't just have your go like, so I started blasting. Like, if you're suddenly like encountering this, have them respond in such a way that's like, oh shit, and don't just immediately have them try to like auto the fight. Have them struggle, have them get injured. Like, the more that your character gets the shit kicked out of them, or fails at an allotted task, or fails at a particular storyline, the more people are actually going to like them. And that's a really key thing. Like, I'm not interested in your super giga soldier who can carve through a platoon of 100 soldiers in under 5 seconds, and he's super ultimate and everyone loves him. Don't care. Boring as fuck. I care about your exiled fucking soldier who has had his leg blown off in the war, and he's got a crappy prosthetic, and he's grizzled, and he's in a lot of pain all the time, and he's kind of got PTSD, and he's signed up to try and take down this threat or whatnot, just for the benefit of his family or whatever, and he gets the shit kicked out of him again, and he's in a lot of pain, and he goes down for a few turns. I respect that. That's going to be really cool. That is what's going to interest me the most in seeing these characters actually face adversity and get taken down a couple pegs. There is nothing better than watching a really powerful character that's on a winning streak get kind of wrecked, because it makes their proud moments even better. So when you're not in these big massive fights, okay, use moments in RPs where there's not fights going on and whatnot, of relative calmness, to have your character interact with others and flesh them out. You can have really good dialogue with your characters, where you can help flesh out how they speak, how they act with other people, what their opinions might be in specific situations, depending on what's happening in the RP itself. You can just generally flesh things out. And another really good way to do this is, even if there is a situation where there's not really much happening and you're just appearing in a new point in an RP, and you're like, well, I don't really know how to respond to this, flesh out their backstory. A particular sight, sound, or smell from this new area in this RP might make your character remember something of their home. It might make them remember something, that they really prominently remember. And then you could use that as an avenue to then maybe have a quick little flashback scene explaining something from their past, or just a little paragraph indicating something that is quite key to them but hasn't been fleshed out yet. It's these little things that add to characters and make them more believable. It's just these interactions and flesh out whenever you can. Don't just try to wave everything off. Just have them be proactive. Now, in this same avenue, always have the actions of your character help flesh out the plot that the particular RPGM is giving you, and help it push forward. Because there is nothing worse than characters milling about doing nothing. Be proactive. Have them go out of their way to try and find individuals who might have information about a particular item. Have them try to take a stance against particular bad guys. Have them do various bits and pieces that make sense for them, and also just helps move the plot. If you are unsure about what to do, which can help this, ask the GM. Literally, me, Blue, Romando, Drac, etc. in Tendrils of Fate, Almighty Bleed, Search for What's Lost, and Down the Rabbit Hole have all been any point where somebody's been I'm not sure what I should do, or if there's a good thing to do here. Me or Blue have instantly turned around and gone okay, you could do this, and it would be pretty cool, and it would result in this, and it'd help push forward. And they do that, and it helps the character, and it helps the plot, and it doesn't, it doesn't screw stuff over milling around or wasting time in posts, essentially. So always bear that in mind to be proactive. And the next thing to sort of have them be respected in an RP is obviously to do cool and unique focus scenes with them. That you go into a character RP with multiple others expecting to have the spotlight now and again. If you are given the spotlight, don't squander it. Use it, as I said, to help flesh out both your character and the arc story and push it forward, but also use it to help other people, in conjunction with your character. And if others are given the spotlight in an RP, which is relevant, don't try to have your character shy away. Use your character to help boost theirs. Make their spotlight scene even better, and in return they'll do so for you. And everyone will then love it when each of the characters are getting a spotlight in a particular scene that they're good at. And it helps flesh out. People will also massively respect you more, and if they massively respect you and your character more, it's going to be more memorable to them. So that's a really prominent thing to do. Don't try to hog the limelight, essentially, because it never ends well in a sort of mutual setting. So the next bit is how to build up respect and make a character memorable across multiple RPs or arcs. So the first sort of obvious thing that you'll probably think of is have ongoing storylines affect them, aka serious scenes in one RP carry over. Well, you'd think that is pretty self-explanatory, but unfortunately that's kind of rare in quite a few RPs. Players tend to sort of gloss over some things sometimes, but if you have a scene that seriously fucks up your character mentally, have that carry over. Of course it would stay with them. Have scenes where you can, flash back to that at some point. Have it really affect them, and just generally have them progress as things go on. Don't just have them sort of be the static same character, that just stays as they are. And this kind of goes into the next bit as well. Have them change over time in relation to key events, and don't have them shrug things off. Everyone's, slowly progressing through life, and I can tell you now that none of you here are the same person that you were not even probably last year. Everything always progresses, and major points in your life will change you. That should be the same for characters. If there is a prominent individual who that character has been friends with for quite a few RPs gets killed, it should affect them. Maybe it means that they're more on edge now. Maybe it means that they're more distrusting. That can then reflect in their RP. Maybe something specific has happened that they've been injured, and that injury plays up as things go along and affects them in future RPs. Maybe there's been some massive event and they've completely changed their outlook. Maybe they were an individual who, believed in peace and prosperity and, I'm going to lead my nation to a peaceful future, but something happened and there was a war crime committed on your nation and, millions of people died or whatnot, and now your entire population is screaming for blood and, to, essentially return the favour, and your leader is now forced into a position where they have to order a strike on another planet and be completely going against their own morals, and you can have that tear them apart. Or it can affect them personally, and then they are like, well, actually, maybe war is the answer, and have that, carry over. Just, at the end of the day, be consistent. Have them act consistently, and in a way that reinforces both their actions in previous RPs and in future RPs. Consistency is key. As long as you can consistently cite previous events, have it affect RPs, and have it affect the future, respond to changes, you're going to be fine. And don't be afraid to use all of these, massive changes to them or carryovers, further their story potential. As we said, link back to, their backstory, those initial personal stories that you're going for, or the stories that they're involved in arc-wise, use these changes to further that. You know, maybe they found the individual that they were looking for, and they took revenge and they killed that person, but it wasn't enough. And it didn't satiate them. And now they feel forever unfulfilled, because they feel like, despite the fact that they killed that individual, it wasn't enough, and it's now eating away at them. And like, you know, all of this stuff, and you can tie this in and really help, you know, bolster things as they come. I'm just going to have a quick drink a second. Oh, that's better. So another thing is, have them take these risks and actions which would change them. For better or worse, it doesn't matter. A really good thing to have for your characters is them going through all of this bad stuff, and massive setbacks to their plans, massive defeats. It changes the character, but by God, it makes it much more fun to read, because it seems much more interesting that way. You know, you don't want them to be this static person, and at the same time, you know, if it makes sense for your character to take a risk, and that risk might have them getting, you know, crippled or killed or something bad happening, take it. If it makes sense in character, do it. Just, you know, don't be afraid to throw your characters into, you know, the crucible of fire, essentially, because, you know, it's going to be an interesting outcome for story overall, and it might affect other characters that you have. If one character sacrifices himself in a heroic way, another character that you have that's in a different concurrent arc might be affected by it. And you can use that for story purposes. It's all about interlinking and consistency. So, a really key aspect to making characters memorable and respectful across multiple RPs is to avoid, at all costs, memey and cheesy moments. It takes a long time and a lot of work to create a character, okay, and get them to a position where everyone respects them and likes them. However, it only takes one RP post to ruin them, and for people to be like, oh, okay, that's a bit memey. It only takes some cringy dialogue with a Dragon Ball Z charge-up attack where they try to one-shot the big bad boss like it's nothing. It only takes one post where they completely shrug off, you know, a massive attack where it would have killed literally anyone else had they not dodged out the way, or, you know, if they just completely and utterly ignore the fact that somebody gets killed in front of them, or any moment where it feels like the character is being massively inconsistent with everything that's been laid before, like suddenly they take a decision that completely 180s like everything that you built up about this character. It only takes one of those moments to destroy them. And you need to avoid that. You need to always think to yourself, you know, is this for the progression of the character? Does this fit them? Does this fit the plot? And, you know, it's always okay to have a little bit of a meme now and again. That's fine. Little bit of a joke here and there. That's fine. That's not going to destroy anything. But, as said, edgy acting or like memey situations, it can ruin everything. And next thing you know, people might not care about your character because they'll be like, oh yeah, that's that meme guy who did this meme thing. And it's like, oh, that's not what you want your character to be remembered for. So, in this, have them consistently take hits, get knocked down, take losses, etc. It's the best form of character progression, especially in major story arcs. Like, I'm going to get onto some notable examples of characters in Ancerious later, and, like, this kind of also applies to nations, and I think I'm kind of like a broken record in that I've talked about this for Nation RP for God knows how long. Losing is the best story ever. Losing creates far better story than winning. I can guarantee you that 100%. The best stories in this group over the last 10 years have come from nations or characters who have been defeated multiple times, even have overcome all of these like major obstacles in their past, or who have been like, downtrodden and everything, and have managed to rise up to all of these like crazy moments. Because all of that downbeating and losses means that when they finally reach that peak, it's perfect and it feels really fucking deserved. So do not be afraid to have your characters get beaten down, lose battles, even if you're in an RP where you feel like you're winning and a GM might introduce this like super duper bad guy and be like, okay guys, I actually want you to get beaten here, and the RP takes a completely different direction. That's fine. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to have your character get wrecked, because it's going to be cool in the long run. It's sort of the same thing in like any sort of tabletop like D&D and that. Don't expect the party to just go around winning all the time. Absolutely kick them in the shins, like get them down on the floor, get them experiencing some really shit situations, because it's going to make the victory all the more sweeter and people are going to be much more emotional about it. This is a key thing, especially if it's tied into major story events where everything culminates in a particular scene, and if there is a particular memorable character doing an action that is crucial to such, everyone's going to love it. So, the next sort of section is how to develop and plan a future for your character. So we've already gone over the fact that, you want to have a rough plan for where you want them to go story-wise. Even if it is just a basic, like, I kind of want them to do this in the future, but I'm not really sure beyond that. That's fine. At least you've got a path for them. You don't just want them to mill around. Another thing is give them, as we said, adversity out of the gate through backstory and inherent hurdles that they must overcome. Straight out of the gate, I can think of like several characters that we have in the group who came with, inherent problems that they had to overcome. And that was their personal quest to get through. So give them their own internal story arc through self-progression. You don't have to have your character be purely, reliant on the overall story arc. Give them their own personal stories. As we said, a particular character might need, have a quest for vengeance against somebody, or they might have some internal conflict between opinions, or they might need to escape their family, or be trying to escape their family, or like any number of things. You can have that personal or several personal stories going on, as you're progressing through whatever arc that they're part of. Those stories can then be used by a GM to add spice to that story, also tie in your character and give them spotlight, and help your character and just spice up like all of the story as a whole in general. Because if your character is personally progressing, well, good, because then they've actually got a future and they've actually got something to work towards. And that's cool. Everyone wants to see that. Everyone wants to see Globnark, the mean man, finally slay his father in Mortal Kombat, because he got downtrodden as a kid or whatnot. But always try to work towards that. Another thing is, give them an end goal. It doesn't have to be, a true end goal, but it's just have a general idea of what they want in life. Where would the character ideally want to go, get to, and be like, I'm content with myself? Think about your own lives and think, at what point would I be able to sit down and go, yeah, I'm happy. I've achieved what I want. Like, what are your goals that will get you to that point? Your character should have the same. Even if that is, Globnark, the mean man, slaying his father or whatever. Like, there needs to be an end goal that your character is actively working towards. Because if they don't have an end goal that they're actively working towards, again, they're kind of milling around and don't really have a direction. Now, this, end goal could be tied into a particular plot arc or whatever, or it could just be a personal, plot arc that they have. It doesn't matter. You can even have multiple end goals, and when your character gets to an end goal, something could happen, and they have a different end goal. That's fine. That's story progression. That's just doing it in chapters. It's all good. And to sort of reinforce this, tie your characters into other characters and plan for major personal changes, because there's nothing better than having characters working together and reinforcing one another and their own personal stories that then can lead to, scenarios happening where one character dies and it completely turns the other character upside down or whatnot, and suddenly they have to deal with this, and it just makes it all the more interesting. Just don't be afraid to throw curveballs in there, because it's just going to add spice, and it's just going to make it even more interesting to read. Nobody cares about some random dude who casually wins and walks all the way to his end goal, achieves it, sits down, smokes a pipe on a beach and calls it a day. But people are going to care if he has a really close friend from another species who's being played by another player, who they've been dueling for God knows how long as best friends, and all of a sudden one of them gets killed by this big bad, and the other guy goes insane and fucking runs off to kill it or whatever, and it's just more interesting that way. So now we get on to the fun bit, which is pitfalls, tropes, and what to avoid which can detract from your character. So the first one is meme stereotypes. Please don't try to create meme stereotype characters. It just doesn't work. Just create normal people, man, or just something that fits what you're going for. Don't just create edgy McEdgelord with a scythe and a fedora and a trench coat all in black. Nobody's gonna care. Same thing of I have my super awesome emperor, and he has, super duper mega abilities, and everyone loves him ever, and whatnot. Nobody's gonna care because he doesn't have any adversity. Just try to break stereotypes when you can, but use them to your own benefit. It's fine to go for a stereotype, but don't do it in a complete way that just breaks the character from the start. And yes, Dictator, there is a whole faction of North FC supporters, but they have so much individual source that they're pretty well established, actually. They're supposed to be there for somewhat comic relief, but they're also used to tell particular stories that you wouldn't really find or believe in from their point of view, I guess. But the next one is, I guess, memes/funny scenes. Again, this kind of ties back to the whole thing of don't have your super serious character. Okay, so you've got this character who's a super serious diplomat. Okay, and they take everything seriously. They've got a lot riding on their shoulders. They've got this all of this stress behind the scenes, etc. Don't have them go to this random diplomatic meeting and then have them be all funny and memeing and stuff with other diplomats because you decided to change the pace of the RP and do some funny stuff that. Breaks immersion. It doesn't make sense. Funny scenes don't really work unless your character is so well established that people can at least take it somewhat seriously in regards to, they've gone through a lot, but they're taking a moment to just sort of relax and, be a bit silly. Okay, fair enough, but don't try to force memes, and don't try and force funny. It doesn't work. It breaks immersion. This ties into acting inconsistently. If your get up and go chill person is all of a sudden this super duper edgelord, and then the RP after is this super talkative chill person, and then the next RP over is this aggressive, edgy person who's loner, it doesn't really make sense, and it's you're playing different characters. Be consistent. try to reference your own lore and internal stories, and keep the same feel of the character. Don't just throw it overboard. Trying to hog the spotlight, as we've said, if you just try to be the centre of attention all the time, you're going to piss off everyone that you RP with, and nobody's going to like your character. End of story. That's just how it goes. This is a cooperative writing group. We're all here to have fun. Everyone in the same RP is supposed to work together for each other's fun, as well as the progression of the story. If you're not going to try and do that, I don't know why you're here. Of course, some people might not be too aware that they're doing it because, sometimes you're really in the moment and you're really having fun. Just be aware. Tell them. Don't be a dick about it. Politely tell them. Work it out. Communicate. At the end of the day, communicate. There doesn't have to be a flame war or any problem over it. Just let them know. Creating a character and playing them as too powerful off the bat. Well, again, if you're just sort of waving off any adversity and just creating like these superpowered characters who are absolutely super duper epic and, always winning, then nobody cares. Like, as I said, I don't care about your super meme emperor that everyone loves, can't do any wrong and can flick away problems at a drop of a hat. Like, that doesn't interest me. That's poorly written. But I'm going to be interested in your emperor who is actually got no superpowers whatsoever and is desperately trying to hold his empire together because loads of different factions are out to get him. That I like. That's interesting. So, don't try to ignore adversity and don't try to create these super powerful characters who, quite frankly, are never going to change and never going to face this adversity or any personal issues because it's boring. And don't have characters with no end goals or motives, because what's the point? They're just going to mill around. They're not going to do anything. I've seen plenty of people on other servers, and it's happened here before, create characters and especially entities that just sort of show up in RPs, but they don't actually contribute anything. They're just there to be oh, I'm here purely to watch, or oh, ha ha ha, I'm here now, live funny time, or oh, well, this is mysterious and I'm just here to do this, that and the other, and not actually contribute to this plotline in any way. And it's okay, what's your motive? Oh, it's either unknown or there is none. It's okay, that doesn't contribute anything. Why are you here? What is the point of your presence in this RP? How does this build on anything that anyone can use? So, stay away from that sort of thing. So, notable characters in Ancerious which are memorable. So this is just on my end. So the first one is Solon Reich from Carnath. This is Landrum's character. Started out a bit edgy, but that's fine. We all do. He's quite an old character. I guess he became very clear to my memory because he made a very big fucking act during the first Ancerious War conference where he drew a gun and placed it on the table of a peace conference, which caused mean chimp outs from everyone involved and the whole thing to fall apart. Now, at the time, it didn't really have much character implications, but later on, Dan actually rolled with that and had that effect right as a person. He got reprimanded, but it wasn't enough of a reprimand, and so this caused issues between one of my characters, and they were sort of on pretty frosty terms until later on in the second war, where they were commanding stuff together. They basically came to essentially joke about it, and in the end, it turned out that Reich had some serious issues because of an accident that had happened, and he had nightstone substance in his body, and he also had this burning hatred towards a particular faction, and Dan kind of fleshed out his dark side, and really kind of got him to a point where it's hey, this is a pretty memorable person in the group. who started out as a kind of like memorable mean man because he did a mean thing, but used that to then essentially, like, create this really memorable character. The next one is Shaw, but for all the wrong reasons. So Shaw is what we would call a edgy Sonic OC, where he was super duper 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 mega powerful. He was a big evil, like, mustache twirly bad guy. He had virtually no motives whatsoever. He didn't really contribute anything. He was always acting behind the scenes in virtually any RP that he could to just cause chaos and be a big evil guy. He got his ass kicked by, like, virtually everyone. He never really achieved anything and just sort of poofed into thin air because the guy got banned, but also, like, even before that, the character just started acting so inconsistently that it wasn't even that character anymore. And because of that, like, Shaw is so memorable because he takes up quite a lot of the early canon timeline, but never actually goes anywhere, develops, or achieves anything. So it's just kind of like the perfect example of what not to do in a character. The next one is my character, Admiral Hagen. He started off as this, like, cookie cutter admiral who, like, just wanted to do the right thing, and he was a grizzled old war veteran. But over time, I've developed him to, like, have sort of like PTSD, and he's getting old now, and he's unsure about the direction that his nation's taking. And despite the fact that he's a war hero, everyone's trying to sort of like fish him to get him on their side, because if he gave his, I guess, support to a particular side in my nation, it would then cause a massive power shift. And so he's got all of these other captains and admirals that he's sort of brought up over the years, all these other characters that he's, I guess, mentored, and they're all now starting to diverge, and some of them are actually, like, disagreeing with him and turning against him, and he's now watching all of, like, I guess, his work for the past 50-odd years starting to fray and fall apart, and he has to deal with that. He's fought battles, he's got his ass kicked, he's had one of his ships blown up. So yeah, like, there's kind of like this been long running thing. He's even developed a relationship with another character of Neo's. So there's kind of like a lot there. But I guess for me, the most notable character, which is the most memorable in Ancerious, and I think a lot of other people who have been here quite a long time would also agree with, and this isn't me blowing my own horn, is my character, Empress Inara. Now, this might be a bit of a long explanation, but Empress Inara was possibly the most influential character in the group. She comes from a nation that is heavily fascist, super authoritarian, like, started out as mustache twirly evil Nazis, okay? However, she comes from a period in the group where everyone's nations were run by, like, super powerful entities, yeah? She was a normal woman. Absolutely standard woman. Her father hated her, who was the previous emperor who died in the war. She was abused. She was, like, seen as pretty much nothing. However, when her father died, and her brother got killed by her hand, by the way, she then inherited this entire nation that was a laughingstock of the galaxy, had just completely and utterly lost the First Galactic War, and was so backwards that it was completely fucked. She turned that nation into a powerhouse that then effectively almost steamrolled most of the major nations in the galaxy in the Second Ancerious War. She did that by, like, reforming her nation to the extent that she could, because there were some things that she couldn't do because her nation was, I guess, too set in its ways. She had to balance being this kind of, like, progressive individual in this super authoritarian right-wing state with also being kind of like wanting to be more progressive in what she did, but being held back and having to balance the morality of what she was doing. She was trying to help her people, but some of the things that she was doing to help her people were pretty fucking bad, including, starting a galactic war and committing war crimes. But the memorable thing about Inara is that I wasn't just writing her from like standing at the parapet shouting propaganda. I wrote her personal life. I wrote the moments that, between her shouting fiery rhetoric as like actually having like breakdowns, or, her wife got killed because she was actually gay and that wasn't allowed in this state. And so her father had her like wife executed previously, and she actually went out of her way to make a pact with dark powers to have her resurrected. And she like did all of these things to try and help herself, but also help her nation, like making alliances with nations that weren't particularly, let's just say, the nicest individuals. And like she effectively like signed her soul away, more or less, to like all of these different nations to get her people power, because she wanted her nation to be like the best that it could possibly be. And in the process, she fought this massive galactic war. She used super weapons to wipe out entire solar systems and kill all these people. At the same time, I was writing journals of her questioning her own morality, of her basically being like, this war was a mistake, we should never have done it. And like all this stuff, especially as the war started to turn towards like the nation losing, she was going out of her way and being like, oh shit, what have I done? Like, I should have done all these things differently, and like trying to do all of this stuff. And she was actually negotiating with like the other side, kind of, and there was a lot of character stuff going on, and I focused very much on her personal failures and how much she wanted to do all of these different things, but she couldn't, because the reality was that if she did that, her own people would turn against her. Two, eventually, when she surrendered to the Allied forces, her own people turning against her and storming her palace to try and kill her, to her trying to, like, get her wife and adopted child, who she'd rescued from the rubble of a nuclear blast on her own capital, to safety. And, later on she got imprisoned. And I wrote her, in prison, reflecting on what happened. And eventually I wrote her execution. And I'm not going to lie, I put off writing her execution for months because I didn't want to write it. It was extremely emotional, and I was essentially killing off the best character that I'd ever made, and one that I seriously enjoyed writing. And so when I actually did it, I'm not going to lie, I cried, because it was such a emotional trip for me as a person, as well as this character. And I hope that everyone enjoyed her character arc through the group. So she was, in my opinion, the most memorable individual. There's loads more memorable characters out there in the group, but those are I guess, my top picks. So the next section is notable characters in IPs. Mass Effect Commander Shepard. I mean, it gives you a very, I guess, foundational backstory that you can choose. You're this person. This is the life that you've had before. And it gives you all of the choices, and you see Shepard progress as a character. They go through all of this fucking tough shit. They take losses. They start suffering from PTSD and the weight of everything on their shoulders. And, it all comes crashing down, and it culminates in a final moment that is emotional and feels well-deserved. That's the kind of thing that you want to go for. That, to me, is extremely memorable. Another one is Admiral Adama from, Battlestar Galactica rebooted. You have this tough-as-nails old Admiral who's about to retire, suddenly faced with the weight of the human race on his shoulders, and he goes through all of this stuff, finding love again eventually, and then, suffering for all of this shit, politics and all of this stuff. He takes multiple hits, he gets shot, he loses stuff, he has to play power games and struggles, and in the end, it's well deserved. Like, the character is extremely well done and sticks with me. A poor example would be, as we touched on, Rey from the sequels trilogy of Star Wars. Terrible character. Absolutely awful. Probably one of the worst written characters in the history of major movie titles. Absolutely no background. Absolutely no character development as the plot goes on. Waves off every single piece of adversity. Is super powerful, and so can just completely and utterly ignore any obstacles in her path. Doesn't develop, and contributes fuck all to the story. Key thing there. You've all probably got notable characters and IPs that you're just like, damn, that person's memorable. And, anyone who's going to be listening to this on recording can think so as well. Think about the aspects of what makes those characters memorable to you and try to incorporate that into your writing and planning when creating characters. And you won't go wrong. You literally can't go wrong if that's what you do. As long as you take those aspects, you should be fine. And that leads into our final segment, which is how to deal with character death, closing stories, and closure in general. The answer is, you never deal with it, you cry yourself to sleep at night. I'm joking, of course. Or am I? So, first off, if you have a planned ending, it can be hard to write. Because you've gone through it all, you've had your character face adversity, have their high points, and now they're getting to the conclusion and, their closure. Make sure you compose yourself before writing it. Do it on your terms. Don't rush it, because closure is very, very important to story. If you can't close off a story, then I'm sorry, but you're going to fucking ruin the entire thing. Star Wars sequel trilogy. I'm not bitter, I swear. But, do it on your terms. Don't try to rush posting it. Don't try to rush writing it. If you feel the moment, do it. If you don't feel the moment, don't push it. Make sure that you've got good music, you're in the zone, and you can write it to the best of your ability. And I want you to put your absolute all into it and your heart into it, because that character deserves it. That's what I did for Inara. I got the music going. It was time for her to go. And I wrote that shit. And it took me a fair few hours. But I had to compose myself while doing it. Characters deserve the best, and so you should give them the best, especially for the ending. Now, if it's not a planned death, and you've decided that, a moment in an RP is good enough, and you've decided that this character that you've been, using in several RPs is going to die doing a particular act, in a really fucking cool blaze of glory, again, talk to the GM, sort it all out, get everyone in the RP on your same page, plan it all out, give them an awesome send-off. As I've talked about in a previous discussion on big bads, a really good thing to support big bads is having major characters die. Cannot get any better. People will take big bad seriously if you do that. And if you want to sacrifice one of your major characters in a blaze of glory, or even if it's not a blaze of glory, they just get, yeeted by this thing, do it so that you're all on the same page, do it good, make it impactful. They deserve it, you deserve it. You put in the effort, Always make your character death and closure mean something and contribute to a story. Never do Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is how not to do character death under any fucking circumstances. Don't piss your characters away because you're a lazy old man who cannot be bothered to write multiple different character arcs and stories at the same time, yeah? Pissing your characters away does not contribute to the story. Keeping those characters alive, have them contribute to the story at the same time, and kill them off in ways that contribute to the story, absolutely. Do that. Always have it contribute to a story and mean something. There is nothing worse than watching a character that has been built up over multiple RPs or multiple episodes or whatever, or multiple films, getting fucking yeeted out of left field at the last possible second, and then just, yeah, that character's get dead now. Like, okay, what did that achieve? Oh shit, that subverted expectations. I don't give a fuck about subverting expectations. I care about good story. And if that character can contribute more to a story alive than they can dead, keep them alive. If they can contribute something massive to the story by dying, do that. Yeah? But don't ever just piss your characters away. There is nothing worse. Know that your character dying is not the end. All characters have a legacy. This is something I had to realise with Inara. She has a legacy. She is still talked about to this day, in character and out of character. If you can get that, your character should have a legacy. Yeah? People should be able to reference them in character. Their actions in the story should have consequences for others for years to come. If they've done big overarching plot lines, yeah? Tie that in and have other people tie into it makes you feel a lot better, and it also just improves the story in general. And be happy for what they contributed to the story in the group. Yeah? Be proud of yourself. Even if your character has only appeared in 3 RPs and they've kind of contributed some stuff, you've given it your all. Maybe they're not the absolute be-all and end-all of this story arc, but they've been in it every step of the way. Be proud of that, man. That's still a contribution to the story. Like, you don't have to be absolute front and centre all the time to be able to write a good character or to contribute a key aspect for an RP. As long as you've been there and you do it, you can say, I was in that, I contributed that, I wrote that, be happy about it. And, everything's going to be alright. But that pretty much wraps up everything I was going to say. Do you guys have any questions or statements that you want to put in comms text chat that I can read? Ammo put, I don't care over your dystopian mega dictatorship MC war crime nation. I just want to read the smaller stories in the trenches and how the citizens and individual soldiers cope in the real world you created. Absolutely. The little guys are massively important to actually creating a setting. I don't want to focus on your emperor all the time. I want you to tell your faction through all sorts of characters. I want to see what your society is like at the very top. I want to see what it is like in the middle, and I want to see what it is like from the very bottom, from an inside and outside perspective. If you could give me that, I'm going to be much more interested in both your nation and your characters. Absolutely. So, for sure. Also, yes, Kuma, I'm going to have to make that meme now. And then cry about it. Who do you think is your favourite or the most promising upcoming major character currently developing in the setting? Oh, that's a tough one. I have to say, at the moment, it's going to be Mr. Alesso. Now, some of you are probably going to be like, literally who? He is the leader of the army of the Panopticon, which is the current big, massive threat. And he is going to become a quite prominent figure in the future, and I'm very eager to see what happens there. For favourite character at the moment, that's, again, a pretty fucking tough one, considering that there's been some really great character stuff at the moment, telling things from all angles. So I don't really have a favourite. I'm just really proud of everything, going on at the moment, more or less. Goose says, it's good to keep in mind to not make too many characters in place of reusing the same few, since most of the time it's better to have a few very memorable characters than a plethora of unknowns. Absolutely. Having recurring characters is good, as long as those recurring characters fit in the setting that you're putting them in RP-wise. If you can do that, it's going to be good, and you shouldn't have a problem. Don't just spam like 50 different characters and hope one sticks. Monty says, how would you handle introducing characters that won't be permanent for a combat RP? You briefly introduce them and then have them die at some point. So, I guess for that, you don't have to go super in-depth about everything. Just make it so that they have at least an impact on the RP and help push the RP and plot forward. Think of them as a story asset and treat them as such. You know? They're a story asset, still treat them with respect, but if they're going to die for the benefit of that particular RP as a disposable asset, they're going to die. Don't spend too much time fleshing out everything, unless that's your intent. Yeah. Any other questions before we wrap this tonight? Who will finish first? People desperately typing to get their questions out. Like faster, boys. Do you have any commentaries about characters that escape the common character mold, as in something that doesn't interact like a human would? Yes, okay, that's actually kind of important. So, there's two sides to this. One, when approaching alien characters, it's okay to have them act inhumanly, but try to make it so that they're at least relatable. Making a truly alien character that does like weird and wonderful things because it's an alien. Yes, okay, but if your people who are reading can't relate to it, then it's kind of a pointless character. And AI also ties into that as well, yes. Make them relatable still, give them motive, give them backstory, give them development. They're still a character, they should still run by the same rules, they're just going to be a bit quirky and different, because they're obviously not fitting the human mold. Second, mental health or mental problems. I do not advocate writing characters with extreme mental difficulties or handicaps that you yourself are not familiar with. Now, I think we had a little bit of a discussion in this chat earlier in May about it was that guy who got banned talking about wanting to make an AI with dissociative identity disorder. That stuff is very complex, okay? And unless you've personally experienced it, it's very hard to write it from a perspective that you understand. And there is nothing worse than you trying to give your character some sort of I guess mental health problem that you don't understand and then fucking it up and making it look like a complete, I guess, joke or stereotype or meme. Don't give your characters mental disorders for the sake of being quirky and different. Have it so that it actually develops. Okay, your soldier went through a massive fucking nuclear holocaust on Rubicon 2. They have PTSD. Understandable. That's cool. Fits. You don't have to write about it every 5 seconds. Yeah? Giving your character, multiple personalities and then having it so that you can essentially write multiple characters from one character standpoint just because it's cool doesn't make sense. That's not how it works. Same as when people are like, oh, schizophrenia is just going to make you crazy and do all sorts of crazy, weird, quirky stuff. That's not what it does. That's not even remotely what it does. Just, if you're going to write characters with that sort of thing, I personally recommend doing a lot of research into it first, then writing it. And if it doesn't work out, then, cool. But that's my take on the sort of like weird characters that don't fit the mold. And thank you for bringing that up, Goose. Um, so yeah, and no, Mr. Alesso is Victor's character. But I will wrap that there for tonight. So thank you all for coming, guys, and I will catch you again soon.